Hey there, Corey Lennox here for Piano with Corey, and I'm so excited you're on this video today because I'm going to teach you how to play piano in the simplest and most effective, direct way possible. I've been playing piano for over 30 years now, and I graduated from the Berklee College of Music as a piano principal. But way more importantly, I've been teaching piano for over a decade now. So I've seen the journey that beginners have to take to get from point A to point B and be able to start playing piano. So in this video, I want this to be your one-stop shop for all the piano basics you need to get started. We're gonna cover playing, we're gonna cover music theory, technique, a little bit of arranging. So I really encourage you to make a commitment to yourself to stay through this entire video. It's going to be really well-rounded and it's gonna give you everything you need to get started. And the very first thing I wanna jump in with today, you might think this is a little weird or a strange place to start, but it's actually something to do with your mindset. So stay with me here, this is so important, I wanted to put it first. Think of learning piano as more about doing than about learning. And I know that might sound crazy. I mean, I'm literally a piano teacher, so nobody values learning more than I do. But when you're first starting out, most of your progress is going to come from doing rather than from trying to learn a bunch of different ideas. So I'll give you an analogy. Imagine you're talking to someone and they're bragging about how good of a basketball player they are. And so you ask, okay, that's great. Do you do drills? Do you play a lot of games? Like, how did you get so good? And they say, oh no, I've never been on the court, but I've read like every book about basketball that's out there. You'd be like, okay, that's great that you know so much, but to be a good basketball player, you have to go play basketball. And it's the same thing with piano. You could learn everything there is to know about piano intellectually and still be the worst piano player out there because you haven't sit down and put the time in. So for you, let's learn enough to get started. That's why you're here on this video. But then I immediately want you to go start taking action, practicing and putting in the time. That's how you learn how to play piano. And by the way, if at any point you want more hands-on, in-depth guidance, I do have a Piano in 30 Days course that you can check out in the description or the pinned comment. But enough about that, let's finally dig in to the good stuff and let's teach you how to play. Now, the reason most people want to learn piano is to be able to play their favorite songs. Well, what is a song? A song is simply melody plus chords. I love boiling it down like that. It makes it so much easier and less intimidating to know that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to usually play melody with the right hand and chords with the left hand. So melody is the part of a song that you would sing or hum or whistle, and the chords are the emotional bedrock underneath. And we're gonna talk way more about this going forward. But before we can get into that, first we just have to make sure we're all on the same page and we understand the layout of the piano. So this is what I call the orientation section. If you already know the layout of the piano, meaning the different keys, the sharps and flats, feel free to skip ahead to the next section. But if you're a beginner, or even if you're just a little bit shaky on some of it, I want you to stay and check this out with me. As you can see, the piano has white keys and it has black keys. And the black keys are laid out in groups of 2 and 3, 2 and 3, all the way up and down the piano. The white keys are named after the letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And after G, it just starts back over on A again. And I'm gonna show you how to find those right now. So obviously we wanna start with the letter A. And the way you find A is you go to the 3 black keys, and in between the second and third black keys is the note A. Then of course after A, we would have B, and then C, D, E, F, and G. Then after G, it just starts back over on A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So that's the layout. Now, one thing that a lot of people do that drives me crazy is they put stickers on the keys. Whatever you do, do not put stickers on the keys. Because first of all, you're gonna go to a piano that doesn't have stickers on it and feel totally lost and confused, like the rug's been pulled out from under you. The other thing is, it's really not that hard to just learn the layout of the keys, right? I'm gonna give you an exercise right now that I show all of my beginner students, and they never have to worry about where the keys are or what the names are or anything like that ever again once they do this. And the way we do this exercise is we start on A, and we're going to use the black keys to find every version of A that we can on the piano. So in other words, here's 3 black keys, there's A. Here's 3 more black keys, here's another A in between the second and third. 3 more black keys, here's another A, and we're just gonna go and find every A that we possibly can. And then after A, we would go to B, and we would try to find every B on the piano. So as we can see, B is right after the 3 black keys. So I can really easily see that. I look for 3 black keys, there's B, 3 black keys, there's B, all the way up and down. And I think you kind of get it, but I'll show you one more example. Let's go from B to C. Now where is C? Well, it's right before the 2 black keys. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. 2 black keys, there's C, 2 black keys, there's C, and we're gonna just go up and down and find all the C's we possibly can. And the reason we wanna use the black keys to orient ourselves is because if we use the white keys, we're gonna get lost. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, for the white keys, there's 2 spots that look almost identical. B to C looks almost exactly the same as E to F, in that this doesn't have a black key in between, and this doesn't have a black key in between either. So if you're looking at the white keys, it's really easy to get mixed up between B and C and E and F. This happens all the time. Instead, what we want to do is focus on the black keys. If you focus on the black keys, it's basically impossible to get it wrong because B is after the 3 black keys, whereas E, which looks similar, is after the 2 black keys. Okay, so it really helps keep straight which notes are where. That's why we use these groups of black keys to orient as we find our white keys. Now, if you're new to piano, I highly encourage you to pause the video right now and do this action step. Sit down at the piano and find every A, find every B, every C, D, E, F, G. Go through each letter, and if you do this even just 1 or 2 or 3 times, you're gonna feel incredibly comfortable knowing where the keys are on the piano. So take a second and do that right now. Now that hopefully you've done that, let's come back and let's talk about the black keys. The black keys are what we call sharps and flats. So let's start by talking about the sharps. A sharp is simply when you raise a note by a half step. I'll show you what I mean. Let's say we're on A. A half step on the piano is just going to the next key you possibly can, the next closest key. So from A, the next closest key would be this black key, and this would be called A sharp, because I took A and I raised it up a half step. Let's do another example. Let's say I'm on C, right? A, B, C. If I want to find C sharp, I simply go up a half step, bam, there I am, C sharp. Flats, on the other hand, go down a half step. So that's pretty easy as well. Let's say we're back on A. If I want to go to A flat, I just need to go down the closest distance I possibly can, a half step, and this is A flat. Okay, so A to A flat. Let's do another example. Let's say I'm on D, and I want to go to D flat. Well, I lower it down to the next lowest key, and that's D flat. Let's do one more example, and say I'm on B. If I want to go to B flat, I go down a half step, and that is B flat. Now you might notice, wait a minute, this note was also called A sharp. Well, that's because each black key has a sharp name and a flat name. I could think of this as A going up, or I could think of it as B going down. So it just depends what note you're coming from, right? Which angle you're sort of approaching it. So it's the same note either way. Don't worry about this too much. We're gonna talk more about this later, right? When you would call it A sharp, when you would call it B flat. But for now, just know each of these has a sharp name and a flat name. Now let me throw one last curveball at you before we're done with this section. Let's say I'm on E. And then I could go down to E flat, that's super easy. I could go to this black key. But what if I want to go to E sharp? Well, let's see. Here's E up to the next possible key, which is this white key. And we usually think of this as F, but I could also call it E sharp. In other words, sharps and flats can be white keys as well. I'll give you another example. If I'm on C and I want to go to C flat, well, I just lower it down one key, and there's C flat, also known as B. And again, don't get scared by this. We'll talk more about why we give certain notes certain names later on. But for now, just know the vast majority of the time, the white keys are going to be called A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then you have the black keys, which have a sharp name and a flat name. Now that you understand the layout of the piano, we can get into my biggest shortcut to get you playing piano as quickly as possible. So why do I say shortcut in quotes like that? Well, on piano, really, there's no shortcuts. It's all about time, dedication, and practice. But that said, we can work smarter and not harder. So if there were to be a shortcut, this would be it. It's to start by focusing on chords. Now, why do I say that? Well, there's a couple reasons for it. Remember how earlier I said we need melody and chords to make a song, right? The good news is the melody doesn't always have to come from the piano. The melody could come from your voice. The melody could come from someone else playing on a different instrument. And this makes playing piano so much easier at the beginning. Because one of the hardest things, obviously, is doing two different things with two different hands, right? Melody with the right hand, chords with the left hand. However, if instead both hands are doing the same thing, which is playing a certain chord, that's so much easier than splitting up the hands and doing all this different stuff. So if you like to sing even a tiny bit, what you can do is learn your chords and then sing over the piano, right? Sing over the top of it. And at first this might seem kind of weird, but if you learn, say, 4 chords, you could just sing different songs over the top of them, and you could learn, say, 100 songs just by playing 4 chords. Whereas if you're going to do everything on the piano, you would have to learn 100 different melodies to plug in with those chords, and that's a ton more work than just opening your mouth and singing. Even if you're not the best singer or you're just by yourself, right, sitting at the piano and no one else is around, it's fun to play some chords and sing over the top of it and feel like a real musician. Now, if you totally hate the idea of singing even just alone by yourself, the good news is we're not wasting any time. We still have to learn chords either way. Even if down the road you want to play the melody with your right hand. We've got to start somewhere, so why not start with the chords? Let's dig in and let's talk about the first 2 types of chords you need to know. And those chords are major and minor. So we're going to go to the piano, we're going to talk about how to build these, but I want to blow your mind a little bit first. People think chords have to be so difficult and they get so scared. And to be fair, there are tons of different chords out there. But the good news is, the more advanced a concept is, the less you're probably going to use it. And the simpler something is, the more you're going to use it. And to prove it to you, I actually did a little experiment. I took 30 of the most famous songs in all kinds of different genres, from rock to pop, a little bit of classical and jazz, and I analyzed every chord in all of these songs to find what percentage of them were just major and minor. Because I knew it was going to be a huge majority, but I didn't know the exact number. What I found was that 85.9% of the chords were just major or minor. And even crazier, almost half of the songs, 46.7%, were only major and minor chords. They didn't have any other type in the entire song. So if you can master these 2 different types of chords, you're really set to start playing a lot of different stuff right out of the gate. So let's go to the piano. I hope I've sold you on why this is important. Now I'm going to show you how to make them, and let's get into it. Now, what do I mean when I say chord? Well, a chord is 3 or more notes that you play at the same time. But before we can jump into that, let's really quickly talk about intervals. And this is so easy. This is just the distance between 2 notes. For example, let's say I have a C and I go up to the very next note. That would be called a second. 1, 2. If on the other hand, I count 1, 2, 3, C to E would be a third. Okay, then I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I could go to a 5th, a 6th, a 7th, and so on and so on. Pretty simple, right? I'm just looking at the distance between 2 notes. Now that we know about intervals, we can start talking about chords. In its most basic format, a chord is a root note, your starting note, a third, right? 1, 2, 3, and a 5th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So when I put them all together, 1, 3, and 5, I get a chord. And what's cool is you can take that basic root, third, 5th shape and move it around. I could do the same thing on D, root, third, 5th. I could go to F or G or A, right? So I can sort of get a lot of chords using that one simple every other note kind of shape. Now, what makes a chord major and what makes it minor? Let's get into that. The only difference between a major and a minor chord is the middle note, the third. In a major chord, the third is 4½ steps above the root. So let's look at that. I'll show you what I mean. If I start on the root and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, I get what's called a major third. Okay, and that makes this a major chord. If on the other hand, I only count 3, 1, 2, 3, I get a minor chord. So this would be C minor. And as you can see, the only difference was the middle note. Now, some people will take a slightly different approach to teaching this, and you might resonate with this better. I personally don't like it as much, but some people will say, okay, think 4 half steps to the third, and then 3 half steps to the fifth. Then for minor, instead of 4-3, it's 3 and then 4, okay? So to me, that is a little bit trickier because it gives you more chances to mess up the counting. I would rather just think, okay, you've got your fifth, that's set either way. Now you just count either 4 to get major or 3 half steps to get minor. And the good news is if you start with those fifths and then plug in the middle note, it's actually really easy because fifths are almost always gonna match up, right? Like white key to white key or black key to black key. So I'll show you, C to G is a fifth, D to A is a fifth, E to B is a fifth, right? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a fifth, there's a fifth. So you can see it's really intuitive. It fits on your hand perfectly. And you can just count it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The only place on the piano this will not work is if you go to B. So B to F isn't actually quite a fifth. If you actually look at all the other fifths I just showed you, if you were to break it down, there would be 7 half steps. However, when I go to B to F, this part of the piano doesn't have a black key here, and this part doesn't have a black key here. So it throws off the spacing. This isn't quite 7 half steps like I want it to be. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Because I'm at this very specific point in the piano. So what I have to do to get a fifth is raise F up to F sharp. This is the one place where the fifth is kind of wonky, okay? Same thing for the black keys. C sharp to G sharp is a fifth, E flat to B flat is a fifth, and so on and so on. The one place that's different is, again, B flat. It's always the B that's kind of the problem child, right? I want to go from B flat to F. So that's my fifth. In this case, that's 7 half steps. So here's the way to think about it. Fifths are really easy to find. It's just white key to white key or black key to black key, right? It's just going to match up. The only place where that's different on the entire piano is on B and B flat. So now we understand how to get the outer notes of our chord, the root and the fifth, and we understand how to very easily get the middle note of our chord by counting 4 half steps for major and 3 half steps for minor. So let's apply this a little bit. I think you're gonna catch on pretty quickly, and then I'm gonna give you an action step to apply this yourself. So let's say we go to D, and we do this every other note kind of shape. Now, is this D major or is it D minor? Well, let's count. I've got my root, and I'm gonna count 1, 2, 3 to F. So remember, 3 was minor, making this chord D minor. If I wanted D major, I would have to count 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So D major would have an F sharp in the middle. Okay, so that time I just played a random chord and analyzed it after the fact. But let's take another approach. Let's say I want to intentionally find a chord. Let's say I've Googled the chords to a song and I see G minor. Well, let's go to G and get our fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then minor remembers 3 half steps, so all I have to do is go 1, 2, 3. There it is, G minor. On the other hand, G major, as you know, we could just lift this middle note up. 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps is major. And let's do maybe one more example starting on a black key. Let's say I'm trying to play E flat minor. Okay, so we're really jumping into the deep end. Usually you're practicing for months or maybe even years before you dive into all this chord stuff, but I think you can handle it, okay? So E flat minor, let's say we're trying to find that. So the first thing I need is my fifth, E flat to B flat. And again, you could either think of this as 7 half steps, or you could just think black key to black key, or you could even think E and B is a fifth, so if I lower it down, that's a fifth too, right? However you want to think about it. Then we're going to get the middle note, and minor is 3 half steps, so I'll count 1, 2, 3, and there's E flat minor. So I know that last one was a little bit trickier, but really this is all there is to it. And I want you to be prepared for any type of major or minor chord you come across, whether it be a white key or a black key. And the way these chords are written, if you're going to Google it or use sheet music, whatever you're going to do, the way we write a major chord is we just write the letter. So C major is just written as C. E major is written as E. A minor chord, however, is going to have a little M next to it. So F minor would be F with a little M next to it. And this is going to tie into some of the other stuff we talk about later. The way we're going to get better at this and make it second nature for us is to practice it. So let's talk about your action steps. The first thing I want you to do is take every white key and make a major chord and a minor chord on each one. So for example, find C major, then find C minor. Okay, then go to D. Let's find D major and then D minor. Right, you're going to go through each one and take as much time as you need and lock down those major and minor chords. Then the second action step is to do the same thing on the black keys. Only do this once you've done all the white keys, but then you'll go back to say C sharp and you'll find C sharp major, C sharp minor, and then you could go to E flat or D sharp, however you want to think about it, and do major and then do minor. This will take some time, as I mentioned, but it's so worth it because again, 85% of the chords you're probably going to encounter are going to be major or minor. So you've really got to get these down. All right, let's keep going. So now that we've talked major and minor, let's talk about how to actually learn songs, right? We're going to actually play songs you care about and enjoy. And again, this takes so long to get to in most piano methods, but now that you've worked on this, we can actually use this to our advantage and leverage that knowledge. So what I would recommend doing is Googling chords to whatever songs you want to play, and then either humming over them or singing over them, whatever it is. So for example, let's say I want to play, I don't know, Castle on the Hill by Ed Sheeran. I'm going to see D, I'm going to see G, I'm going to see B minor, which we worked on, and then I'm going to see A. And again, if you've practiced these a little bit, this is the easiest thing in the world, but it does take a little work. So then you could go through and you could just, I'm on my way, driving at 90 down those country lanes, right? Doesn't really matter, you don't have to be a great singer, but then you're playing piano, right? And you could use the right hand to play the chords, or you could use the left hand. I'm gonna show you later on how to kind of use both. But just to show you, that's where I think you should start. Work on these chords, Google a few songs, get your feet wet, get excited, show yourself that you can do this. Now, what do you do when you come across a chord that isn't major or minor? Okay, most of the other types of chords you're gonna see that aren't major or minor, that other, whatever it is, 15%, a huge majority of that are going to be what we call seventh chords. And the cool thing is you can actually simplify these down to major or minor without losing too much information. So seventh chords, it's a bit outside the scope of this video. It's not too crazy, but there is a lot more for us to get to. So what I would recommend is if you see a 7, just ignore it, right? If you see C7, just play a C chord instead. If you see F minor 7, just play F minor instead. It's going to sound almost exactly the same. Maybe a little bit less cool, a little bit less flavorful, but it's still going to get the idea of the song across. And just to prove to you that you really don't lose that much by simplifying the chords, let me play you Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, first with seventh chords, and then simplified down to major and minor. So here's seventh chords first. And now here's simplified down. Still sounds great, right? It's maybe not quite as flavorful, but that is a perfectly good rendition of the song. So with major and minor, you can play almost everything you want to do. That said, there are a few other types of chords like diminished chords, augmented, suspended. This is all stuff that you can learn about in my music theory course if you'd like, but it's outside the scope of this video. And frankly, you're really not going to come across these a ton. If you really need to, you can Google, how do I play C augmented, right? And you can look up those other chord shapes as you go. And here's our action step for this section. I want you to look up a few songs that you'd like to play. The easier, the better for now. Certain genres are a lot tougher than others. So if we're talking about top 40, if we're talking about some of the mainstream stuff, anything like Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, that kind of thing is going to be pretty easy. If you're into like progressive metal or jazz, that's going to be a lot tougher. But for now, I encourage you to keep it easy, even if it's something a little more tasteful like, say, the Beatles or maybe even Queen. You could probably get away with doing this. Go and find a couple songs and play either your left hand or the right hand and play the chords. There's lots of good chord resources. I'll put a couple of them on the screen right here. Any one of them is going to be great at giving you different chords for different songs. And last thing I'll say before we move on is be patient with yourself. It might feel kind of weird. It might not make total sense. You might not get it right now. That is okay. People spend years learning how to play piano, and you're already so far ahead of the curve approaching it this way, right? So give yourself that grace. Try it out, but don't get discouraged. Next up, now that we've talked about how to make these chords, let's talk about what we can do with them, different ways we can play them. This is something where you can sound way better than you actually are on piano with very little effort. And let me show you what I mean here. Let's say I've got a C chord. Well, I can play this either all at once, which is called a block chord, or I can play it one note at a time. And that's called broken, okay? I could also do a broken chord like this. I could do the bottom note and then the top two. So there's different ways to play the same chord. I could play block, or I could play broken, I could play low, or I could play high. So one thing I want you to mess around with right now, this is going to be fun, is take any chord you want. Let's pick a minor chord, maybe something like E minor, okay? And what I want you to do is get E minor ready with both hands. So here and here. Okay, I've got E minor, E minor. Then do a broken chord up from your left hand to your right hand. Watch. E minor broken chord, E minor broken chord. Listen to that. Sounds pretty neat, right? Then you can get really fancy and just replace your right hand with your left hand. And then you could take the right hand even higher and play another E minor up there. So I'm doing the same chord, right? Just E minor over and over here. Moving the left hand, moving the right hand. And you can play around with this and start sounding really professional, really fast with just one chord. I could come down. Okay, now obviously it does take a little work, but the idea behind it's really pretty simple. And then you start doing that on different chords. What if I go from D minor to E minor? And why not? Let's do another one, maybe A minor. And then I go to, let's say C, right? You could just play around with this and come up with so many cool things. And we're gonna get more into this later on in the video. This is what's called arranging. And arranging is just simply how you're playing the song, right? So it's not as much about what the melody is or what the chords are, it's how you're doing them. Am I playing it high, low, block, broken? We have all these different choices, and we're gonna get to more on that later. But for now, I think it's high time that we switch gears and talk about melody. Now, melody, on the other side of the coin from chords, it isn't that it's more difficult necessarily or anything like that, but it's more just that there aren't as many tricks that we can use. There's not as many quick things I can show you, and I can say, now you can play 100 melodies. It's more about every song has its own unique melody, and it's our job as a pianist to learn those melodies for the songs we want to play, and every song's a little bit different. So what I recommend is figuring out a few different melodies just to get your feet wet and get you playing the piano. The more you do, the better you're gonna get. But for today, we're gonna start with Piano Man by Billy Joel. This is a classic, and it's not that hard to play the vocal melody. What I want you to do is go to what we call C position. That means I'm gonna take my first finger, my thumb, and I'm gonna put it on C. And you could go to middle C right here in the middle of the piano, or you could go to treble C a little bit higher up. It doesn't really matter. So let's say I'm right here. From C, I'm gonna put all my other fingers out, and this is called C position. Now, to play Piano Man, we're gonna play G, 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 F, E, F, E, C. That's the first phrase. Sing us a song, you're the piano man. See if you can try that out. Then after that, we just play C, 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 D, D. Okay, that's sing us a song tonight. The next part is E, F, G, 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 F, E, F, E, C. Well, we're all in the mood for a melody. The very last part is C, 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 F, E, C, C. Now in the actual song, he dips down a little there. You've got us. But here we're just gonna keep it on C just to make it easy. You've got us feeling all right. Okay, so I know I took that pretty fast. Feel free to pause any of those phrases and go back and really look at it. But I'm gonna play the whole thing so you can hear what it sounds like. Sing us a song, you're the piano man. Sing us a song tonight. Well, we're all in the mood for a melody. You've got us feeling all right. It's that easy. Now, what I don't want you to do, you might have noticed I kept my hand here the whole time. One of the worst mistakes you can make playing piano is just trying to use these first 3 fingers. Now, yes, 4 and 5 are weaker, but we've got to use them to get them stronger. So don't cheat on this melody by moving your hand around to different places. Just keep it right where you started and you'll be able to reach all of the notes. That's why I picked this song. All of that said, see if you can pause the video and play the melody to Piano Man. Let's do one more melody before we move on to anything else, because again, you just want to play as many melodies as you can possibly do to condition your right hand and start playing piano better and better. So let's do Don't Stop Believin'. I love the classic rock songs because a lot of different generations know them. So bear with me, I know maybe this isn't your thing, but try this out anyway. The first phrase is going to be C, E, C, D, D, E. And that's going to be, she's just a small town girl. Then we're going to do C, 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 G, G, E, D. Okay, watch that. Living in a lonely world. Then C, E, C, D, D, E, D, C, D, E, C. That one's a little bit longer, but I'm writing it on the screen for you. And that's going to be, she took the midnight train going anywhere. And we're doing this a little bit different. Journey does it in a different key, but for now we're just trying to keep this easy. Okay, so that whole verse just goes. Then once you get that, the good news is you can just repeat it. And the second part of the verse is the same melody, but with different lyrics, right? He's just a city boy, born and raised in South Detroit. He took the midnight train going anywhere, right? Same melody, different words. So this was just a tiny bit to get your right hand into the melody zone. There's so much more we could talk about. We've got a lot more to get to in this video, including using our right hand more and more. But I highly recommend checking out my Piano in 30 Days course if you want to go way more in depth on all this stuff. Okay, now that you've done that, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about the world of technique. So technique simply means how you're using your hand to play the keys. And obviously there's proper form and there's improper form, right? Just like anything else, weightlifting, sports, whatever. On piano, we want to have good form, obviously. And here's what I want you to do. We're going to test your technique a little bit. Let's play your thumb on C and then go through every finger from there. C, D, E, F, G. And you can do the same thing with your left hand. We can play C with our pinky and walk up to our thumb. Now let's look at what our hands were doing as we played that. The easiest way to explain it is we always want to have a curve to our hand, almost like you're holding a tennis ball or a bubble. And the other thing is we don't want to let our fingers bow in as we play the keys. You can see here I'm bending at that joint, which is actually really painful long-term, especially as you start playing louder. And the thing is, most people when they start playing piano, that is their default, right? As you go down to hit the key, all of a sudden it pops in like that. So really watch out that you don't do this. This is going to take some serious work. And I'm going to give you my favorite technique exercise in a second that shows you how to work on all this. But let me show you a few more ways where people go wrong, right? Things you want to avoid. So another thing people will do is they'll flip their hand up as they go to their pinky, right? And what's happening here is you're trying to use your hand to help your pinky. Don't do that. Let your fingers do their own work, okay? Another thing that people sometimes do is they pop the bubble and they go kind of flat for each note. This is especially an issue with a lot of younger kids, but a lot of adults do it too, where they think they have to put so much force into the notes, right? And you end up sort of slamming your hand down. And obviously we don't want that either. So there's a lot of ways to go wrong. Another thing is you could pop out like this off to the side. But let's just talk about what do you want to do right? Because if you just focus on the right way, you're going to avoid all the wrong ways. The right way, again, is curve fingers. Don't bend at the joints, just keep it curved. And don't pop up or out. And really, it all boils down to what I tell my students, which is just keep your hand normal, right? There you go. I didn't do anything weird or crazy. I just went through each note, kept my hand relaxed, curved, and normal. So a way you can work on this, here's the best way to practice your technique. We're gonna play each of these fingers 3 times in a row, very slowly. So first I'm gonna do my thumb. That one's easy. Now we're gonna go to our pointer finger. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3. It's very slow. Notice I'm focusing. The reason I'm going slow is to make sure I'm not letting this happen and to make sure I'm not popping the bubble. Okay, I'm just trying to get it exactly right. Then I go to my 3rd finger, then I go to my 4th finger, and then I go to my 5th finger. And 4 and 5 are the hardest. You're gonna wanna spend some time making sure your technique is good. And you don't have to stress about this too much or spend hours doing this. It's just a little check-in that you can do every now and then to make sure that your technique is where you want it to be. So I recommend right now, pause this video and do this action step of playing each finger 3 times. And then if you want to up your technique game further, this is a lot harder, so maybe don't try it today. Maybe wait a week or a month, whatever it is. But play all 5 fingers, and then you go back and do the same exercise I just showed you. Thumb 3 times, pointer finger, making sure to keep the curve, 3rd finger, 4th finger, and 5th finger. That one's tough, but it can really help your technique if you find you're having issues with your hand popping up or your hand going flat, fingers bending. It helps with all that. So I know this isn't the most exciting for everyone. Thank you for sticking with me. Let's keep on going. Now we have to talk about putting both hands together. This is where things get a little more interesting because obviously our hands are doing different things. Right hand is doing melody and left hand is doing chords. But fear not, as you know, I'm a big fan of working smarter, not harder. So I've got some tricks and tips for this as well. And the biggest tip I have is we're going to use arranging to our advantage. Remember, I used that word earlier, arranging. That means how am I playing what I'm playing? And what a lot of people don't know is you can really set the level of how easy or difficult you want a song to be. So let me show you what I mean here. And for this whole part of the video, don't worry about trying to play along or follow along on the piano. I'm just gonna play for you and illustrate different difficulty levels and how you would control that, right? So let's take the song How Far I'll Go from Moana. This is a Disney song. And maybe the first level is you're a brand new beginner and all you can do is play the melody. That's fine. And maybe the second level is you're playing the right hand and adding in the left hand, but just with single notes, not with entire chords. And the way we can do that is we can use what we call the root of each chord. And the root is simply just the note the chord is built off of. So in other words, C major, the root note is C. Okay, for something like G minor, the root note would be G right here, okay? So basically just using single notes in the left hand. Watch, I could go. Now maybe the third level is I level up that left hand to full chords. Then maybe after that I graduate to the next level, which is doing a more steady left hand that actually has a consistent beat to it. Check this out. Maybe after that, I go to broken chords in the left hand. So now instead of all together, I'm doing a broken chord. Same exact chord, but now I'm playing it one note at a time. and kind of doing a arpeggiation to it, right? So that might go. Or as an alternate approach on the same kind of level, maybe I'll do like a slash. I could do a rhythmic left hand with the block chords, right? So I could do like, I don't even know. Something like that. I'd probably have to sit and figure out a better rhythm, but just top of the head, that's something you could do. And now maybe the next level is I do a more advanced right hand. So there's a couple ways I could do that. I could take from the chord and I could add some of those notes into the right hand as I play the melody. So for example, when I play this, what if when I hit this note, the top of that, da 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 da, I add in G from the left hand and I add it here on the right hand too. Okay, now I'm working with the chord and I'm adding in some chord tones. And taking that approach, I could really level up the right hand. I could do something like, or maybe I could do what we call octaves with the right hand. So an octave is just 8 notes apart on the piano. It's an interval of an eighth. In other words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. C to C or D to D, right? It's 2 versions of the same note. So 2 C's or 2 G's, right? Those are all octaves. So I could play the melody instead of 1 note at a time. I could play octaves, right? So that might give me. And then the last step would be I can do all of the above. I can do different combinations. So if you hear a really good pianist, they're not just sticking to one or the other, they're not boxing themselves in. So then maybe I could do a mix of all of the above, right? I could do something like chord tones in the right hand and broken chords in the left hand. And then I go to octaves. And then maybe I go to like a rhythmic left hand. And I sort of use all the tools at my disposal to play the song with my own particular style. Now, of course, this takes years to get to, years of work to get to that level, but I just want to show you the basic concept that you can set the difficulty level. If all you can do right now is the melody, great. If, however, you get a little more comfortable, you want to add some bass notes, that's awesome. If you want to start adding chords, like full-on chords, do that. You could do them broken, and you just go step by step. So this is where the knowledge part of it kind of breaks down, and it's more important to do the practicing part, because you might spend a year on each of these levels, or maybe not, maybe like 3 months, but it is going to take a decent chunk of time to go through those different levels and get comfortable with each one. And every song is different. So some songs might be really easy to match the right and the left, others might be tougher and you have to take a simpler approach. Coming up with an action step for this section was actually really difficult, because there's so many different levels of arranging, there's different levels of skill that you could be at, and every song is going to feel different in the way it interacts with melody and chords. But one thing we can do is just a simple hand syncing exercise, and we'll do an easy version and then a slightly harder version. So the easy version is we're going to do a C 5-tone scale. So I'm just walking from C up to my pinky and back down. Then with your left hand, you're going to play a C chord. And the way we're going to sync it up is we're going to play at the bottom of the scale and we're going to play at the top of the scale. Watch this. There you have it. So that's pretty easy, but it'll just give you a taste of syncing those hands together. Now, a slightly harder version is we can do a broken chord with our left hand and the same right hand that we just did. And the saving grace here, what makes it kind of easy, is we are going to match our notes. We're going to match on C, then we're going to match on E, then G, then E, then match on C's. So watch that again. Match, 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 match.
So for your action step, try one of those versions, either block or broken. And then as a more long-term action step, I want you to go learn as many songs as you can, right? So learn different melodies, look up the chords, try to piece them together, and sort of get in the trenches and try it out. So this is where just a YouTube video kind of falls short. Obviously, we can't do 3 years of piano lessons in one video. You need a long-term plan, either a course or a lesson book or taking private lessons with the teacher. That is where a lot of your progress is going to come from. But that said, there's still a ton more to talk about in this video, so let's keep on going.
Okay, so now that you probably feel like completely overwhelmed and just hit with so much information, let's take a breather. And let's talk about, okay, we have all these different ideas in our head. We know we need to practice, whether it be just melody or melody with some easy chords. Whatever level you're ready for, we need to talk about how to learn songs, right? How do you actually go out and start practicing music? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can learn a song, thankfully, so you have to find the way that works for you. One of the most popular ways is, of course, reading sheet music. That's what most people think of, right? Sitting down with a piece of music and reading it. Now, this I'm a little bit conflicted about. I think it's so important to be able to read. Obviously, I teach all my students, it's like the main thing we work on, right? For the first however many years, right? But when you're first starting out, it can be a very slow process. It takes a long time to be able to read, realize what you're reading, sync it up with the hands, put it all together. It just takes some serious time. But if you do want to learn more about reading, I do have a quick crash course video on that I'll put in the description as well. But what if you don't want to dedicate that time yet, or you're not sure and you want to find a different way to learn songs just at the beginning? Well, another way you can learn songs is here on YouTube, right? You can look up YouTube tutorials and find people showing you with overhead videos how to play the songs you want to play. So those can be really easy. They walk you through every step. And of course, you'll have to pick songs that are at your skill level, but I do think that's a good way to just jump in and sort of get started. Now, another way to learn songs is to use what we call lead sheets. So a lead sheet does require a little bit of reading, but what it is it's a melody with a chord symbol. So this is a simplified way of reading. I loved this when I started piano because I hated sight reading and I was actually quite bad at it. So what this does is you're just reading the melody and you're plugging in the chords on the left hand based on the chord symbols like we talked about. And it basically just frees up your mental energy from having to read 2 lines to you're reading 1 line and the left hand you're just kind of plugging in those chords like I said. So that's something you can look into, but let's go to the last way. And this is the way that I think a lot of people would prefer to do it, but it's also the most advanced, which is playing by ear. Because you want to have some piano skills before you try to play by ear. In other words, when you go to play by ear, let's say you could hear every single note in a song perfectly. If your hands aren't trained, you won't be able to play it, right? So the ear training is always going to be limited by your playing ability. Of course, you can still play around and try to figure out some melodies on your own, but as a long-term strategy, I think you need to start with one of the other ones and then worry about training your ear a little bit later. Moving on to the next part of the video, we're going to talk about probably my favorite thing to teach. And I waited so long to get to this because this is the kind of stuff I normally talk about on my channel. So you might have seen this before, but we're going to talk about music theory. And this is so important. This is what I call the language of music. In other words, it helps you just sort of understand why you're doing what you're doing. And this is huge, whether you want to write songs, improvise, or read sheet music played by ear, you're going to need to understand the language of music. Okay, this is what ties all those skills together. So people who don't learn this always find music inscrutable and complicated and confusing, whereas the people who do learn it understand so much better and things come so much easier when they're trying to set out to do those things. That said, let's go back to the piano and let's talk.
Now, the first thing to jump in with is talking about scales. And I know that doesn't sound exciting, but I think a lot of people teach this kind of backwards. I'm not going to show you how to make them yet. First, I want to show you why we even care about them, right? Why do we care about scales? What are they used for? And the reason we care about scales is, remember earlier, I said all songs boil down to melody plus chords. Well, guess what? Melody comes from scales, and believe it or not, our chords come from scales as well. So both halves of that equation come from scales, melody and chords. And we'll start here with melodies. Most people think of scales in the context of creating or playing melodies, which is totally fair. That's a huge way that we use them. For example, let's say I play 1, 2, 3, 5 in my scale, and I'll show you how to make these in a second. But if I just play 1, 2, 3, 5, all of a sudden I'm playing Beyonce. If I were a boy, I'm playing The Greatest Showman. Never enough, I'm playing a Christian worship song. I could sing of your love. It's all from that 1, 2, 3, 5 pattern. Let me give you another example. Let's say I just play straight down through a C scale. It doesn't really sound like anything yet, but what if I put a little bit of rhythm to it? Check this out. All of a sudden it becomes Joy to the World. And all that song is doing at the beginning is walking down through the scale note by note. Here's an even easier example. What if I just play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's Beauty and the Beast. Bittersweet and strange, finding you can change. So that is how people make melodies. Pretty cool, right? You're just taking certain patterns of notes from the scale. Now, I also mentioned that scales can help you with ear training. So one thing I see all the time is people are trying to figure out a song, but they don't know their scales, and it makes it way harder than it has to be. For example, let's say I'm trying to figure out Fireflies by Owl City, and I know the general melodies like, I'd like to make myself believe. Oh man, so that's really tough, right? Well, it's only tough because I'm not using a scale. What I need to do instead is take a step back and learn my scales, and it's going to be 100 times easier. Check this out. There I go. Now that I have a scale, this is going to be so much easier. Now I can just go, I'd like to make myself believe. And there I go, I'm on the right keys. And as for improvisation or songwriting, if I know my scale, anything within a scale is at least going to sound decent. This is a great jumping off point for making something up or writing a song. Right, whatever it is, I'm sort of just staying within my scale and I can't go wrong. So now the question is, well, wait, Corey, how did you do this? How did you make a scale? And now I'll be more than happy to show you now that you actually want to learn how to do it. But I didn't want to show you until you actually cared enough to learn how we make these. The way we make a scale is with something I call the golden scale formula. And it looks like this. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So we already covered half steps in the orientation section. That is where you go from one key to the very next, whether it's white or black, right? It's the closest distance you can go. That's a half step. A whole step is just 2 half steps. So for example, A up a whole step would be 1, 2. Then B up a whole step would be 1, 2, and so on. 1, 2, that's a whole step. 1, 2, that's a whole step. So I encourage you, if that's totally foreign to you, maybe take a second and try a all half step scale, which we call the chromatic scale. And there's a more like technical way to play it, but for now just use your pointer finger. And then once you've done the half steps, once you've practiced those, you can come back and work with the whole steps, right? So doing something like this, C, D, E, whole step, and so on. Just figure out how to do all whole steps as well. So once you've practiced your half steps and your whole steps, now we're ready to talk about combining them to make an actual scale. And we call this the major scale, by the way. And all I'm gonna do is, like I showed you, start on a note, any note you want. In this case, let's start easy with C. Then I'm just gonna follow the golden scale formula. So C, up a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And what you saw right there was that the C scale is all white keys, right? Now, when you're first figuring out your scales, I recommend using your pointer finger. So this might drive some piano teachers crazy. There's a technically correct way to play each scale, but I don't want you to try to do 2 things at once, right? People try and do their fingers and they try to do these crossovers and stuff before they really know what their scale even is yet, and they just get jumbled. So I want to take that out of the equation. Just use 1 finger, keep it simple. We can always go back and find the right fingers later. For now, you're focused on getting the right notes. Let's do another example. Let's go to the G scale. So if I want to make a G scale, I'll start on G. Then I go up a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, 1, 2, and half step. So you saw the G scale actually has a sharp in it. It has F sharp. Now, after you finish a scale, you want to take stock of what you just did. We don't want to have to always go back and say whole step, half step. No, we want to try to start memorizing these. So I'm going to mentally make a note, or maybe you could even write it down, but I'm going to think the G scale has one sharp, which is F sharp. Okay, I'm going to take stock of that. Let's do one more example, and then I'm going to show you something else, right? Let's go to, say, an F scale. So if we start on F, we can go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now this scale had one black key as well. And remember, back in the orientation section, I told you we'd talk more about why we would name certain notes sharp and why we would name certain notes flat. In other words, when I play this scale and I have this note, is this A sharp or is it B flat? It's a good question, right? Well, here's the answer. We always want to keep the alphabet in order, right? So I don't want to say like A, C, D. No, I just want to say A, B, C, D, right? So if I look at my scale, F, G, A, B, B flat, C. So in this case, it's going to be B flat, so I can say F, G, A, B, C. As opposed to if I tried to say A sharp, it would be F, G, A, C? Not quite, right? So this is what determines if we're in, say, a sharp key or a flat key. It's really easy. You just want to keep that alphabet in order. And the biggest mistake people make with scales is they say, okay, whole step, half step. Now wait a minute, I've already gone wrong. So what's the problem? Well, if I play my first note and say whole step, I actually haven't stepped anywhere, right? I've just got one note. So instead I need to say starting note, and then I can start stepping from there. Whole step, half step, and so on. Now, different songs are going to use different scales, right? Some songs might use a D scale, and other songs might use a E scale. So it's just up to the songwriter, it's up to the vocalist, right? How high or low do you want to sing? What sort of scales do you like? There's so many factors that go into the songwriter's choices, but for our end, as a pianist, we have to sort of be ready to play in these different keys, right? So what I recommend doing, here's your action step. I want you to take the golden scale formula and figure out every white key scale. So I'm talking about the C scale, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then you're back to C. Okay, once you've done that, if you feel like you really got it, maybe even spend a month just doing the white key scales. Then you can come back and try the black key scales. And they're formulated the exact same way, but they just start on a black key instead of a white key. So let's quickly do an example of a black key scale, and then I'll let you pause the video and do your action step. So let's say we're trying to play A flat. Okay, so again, we're gonna go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step. No different at all. I just started on a black key. So take a moment now, pause the video and try the action step. Do all of the white key scales, and then later on, maybe a week, a month later, try the black key scales as well. Once you're back, I want to talk really quickly before we move on about technique. So some people get really into scales as a technique exercise, right? They put on a metronome, they drill the scales in 4 octaves, and they're doing all kinds of different stuff, right? To me, when you're a beginner, you're not going to get as much mileage out of that as you think. I think there are way better ways you could spend your time. So I don't recommend drilling the scales as a technical exercise yet. You can later on. But what I'm going to do is at the very least, show you the correct fingers to use. Typically for most of the white key scales, we're going to want to do what's called a cross under on the finger 3. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's say I'm doing my C scale. What I want to do is instead of just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and then running out of fingers, right? Instead, I want to cross under 3. In other words, 1, 2, 3, cross my thumb under, and then keep going. Now on the way back down, I just do the opposite. I'm going to cross my 3rd finger over, and I've got exactly enough fingers to make it through the scale. Left hand is the same deal, but going the other way because your left hand's obviously facing the opposite direction. So I'm going to go from 5 all the way up to 1, cross to 3, then I'm going to come back down and cross under 3 on the way down. And the really good news is almost every white key scale works that same way. If I'm playing, say, a G scale, I'm going to cross under 3. If I'm playing an E scale, I'm going to cross to 3, right? Same fingers that I've been doing. The only two places where we don't use 3 as our cross under point is the F scale for the right hand, because check this out. I've got this B flat, so it'd be really weird to like do that, right? So instead I'm going to go to my 4th finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, cross under, and end on 4 at the top. Okay, so that's my F scale. And then when I come down, I cross to 4 to get back down. For the left hand, you can do the F scale the way you've always done, right? With a 3 crossover, because the flat sits on a different point on your left hand than it does on the right. This is totally comfortable. But for the left hand one that's different is the B scale. I want to start not on my pinky like I normally would, but on my 4th finger. And that just allows me to play the scale more comfortably instead of like my thumb ending up on black keys or anything like that. And honestly, I really don't want you to stress about this. To me, playing and drilling the scales isn't as important as just knowing them. So even if you just chicken peck it, but you know exactly where an A major scale is, that is going to serve you very well. Then later on, you can come back and maybe try using the right fingers. But for now, don't let it stress you out. Now, I know this video has been a lot so far, but this is one of my favorite things to get to, so stay with me here. You might be asking, well, Corey, I get how melodies and scales kind of work together, but didn't you also say chords come from scales too? And the answer is yes. Yes, I did. Chords actually can come from our scale as well. And we call these diatonic chords. In other words, chords that come from a scale, just like we're saying. So let me show you exactly what I mean. Let's take a C scale, for instance, all white keys. Well, what I can do is start on the first note of the C scale, which is C, and I can build a chord off that first note. Remember, root, 3rd, 5th. So there we go. Now, because it's based off the first note of the scale, I call it the 1 chord. Easy enough. If I go to the 2nd note of the scale, I'm going to call that chord a 2 chord. If I go to the 3rd note, I'll call it a 3 chord, and 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. And those are all the quote-unquote correct chords in the key of C. So if I'm trying to write a song in the key of C, or play somebody else's song, improvise, ear train, whatever it is, that's going to be my palette of colors to work with for the C scale. All of those chords. And what's cool is, did you have to worry about whether they were major or minor or diminished or... No, we didn't. The scale automatically gave us the right chords in that key. Unfortunately, it's not always going to be that easy. The C scale is all white keys, so that's pretty simple. But let's pick a different scale. Let's say we have a G scale. As I go through and I start finding my chords in the key of G, I have to remember that I have an F sharp. So here's my 1 chord, starting on the first note of the scale, that's G. Then the 2 chord on the 2nd note of the scale is A minor. The 3 chord, watch this, I don't want to play F, I want to play F sharp. So in other words, almost don't even think of this note as existing in the key of G, right? We have F sharp, not F natural. So then from my 3 chord to my 4 chord, my 5 chord, again, I'm going to have F sharp, my 6 chord, my 7 chord, and my 1 chord. So those would be the correct chords in the key of G. And what I really love about this is it pares down the scary world of chords, because there's literally hundreds, if not thousands of chords out there. And yet, if I stick with this format, at any given moment, I know what all the right chords are going to be. And I put that in air quotes. I should probably give my disclaimer I always give, which is that in music, there really are no rules. There's just jumping off points. So you could totally break the rules. Plenty of composers and songwriters do, but you want to start with the basics before you worry about breaking the rules. So there's plenty of times in the key of G where you might use an F natural, but that's not the default starting place, right? So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of like in painting. You could be Picasso and put 2 eyes on the same side of someone's face, but usually that's not how you would paint a human face, right? And you kind of have to learn the basics first before you get into the crazy stuff. Your action step for this section is to pick any white key scale and find the diatonic chords within that scale. So I'll put them on the screen in the order of the easiest to the hardest to do. And really this comes down to the number of sharps. So obviously C is the easiest because there's no sharps or flats. Then G and F are the next most difficult with only one sharp and one flat respectively. And then you kind of go on from there. D has 2 sharps, A has 3, and so on. And let's say you pick the D scale. Well, that scale has 2 sharps I have to think about as I go through. And you'll know this if you did your action step for the scale section. And the 2 sharps it has are F sharp and C sharp. So as I go through, I just got to remember F sharp and C sharp as I find my 1 chord, my 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and back to 1. There you go. And you could maybe even try 1 a day or 1 a week, whatever it is, but spend some time with this because this really does pay off. And now that we understand diatonic chords, in other words, pulling those chords out of a scale, now we can go on to another one of my favorite topics, which is chord progressions. So what is a chord progression? Well, it's simply a set pattern of chords that you use to create your song. So for example, I could play 1 to 4, right? That could be my entire song. It's just going back between 1 and 4, okay? And there are plenty of songs that do that. Just off the top of my head, we've got Bad by U2, 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins, and State of Grace by Taylor Swift. Now, each of those songs does have like a couple other chords that it goes to at a certain point or another, but the vast majority of those songs are just 1 to 4. But by far and away, the most famous chord progression is one that I call the legendary chord progression because I just love being over the top about it. But it's 1, 5, 6, and 4. And it sounds like this. In the key of C, I would go 1, 5, 6, 4. Okay, so sounds simple enough, but I could play literally hundreds of songs with that chord progression. I can play everything from like 80s hits like Forever Young to the Moana song we did earlier from Disney. I could do The Office. I could do Maroon 5. And I kid you not, I could just sit here for so long and play you song after song after song that just uses that progression. And I've got to admit, it's pretty awesome how much mileage you can get out of just, say, 4 chords. Now, the one kind of complicating factor is not all of those songs are in the same key. In other words, they're not all using the C scale. The Office, for example, uses the G scale. The Moana one, that uses the E scale. Okay, so different songs will use different scales. But here's the good news. Even though different songs use different scales, if you don't have perfect pitch, which I don't, our ear doesn't care a ton about what particular scale a song is using. For example, when I played The Office in the key of C, were you like, wait, what song is that, right? I have no idea what that is. Or earlier I did Beauty and the Beast in the wrong key. You know, it's not normally in the key of C, which is where I played it. But yet you're not sitting there like, wait a minute, what song is that, right? Like you know what song it is because your ear is perfectly happy to hear Beauty and the Beast in the key of C or to hear it in the key of C sharp, which is where the original is. Right, so in this way, not having perfect pitch can really be a blessing. And this is what singers do all the time. If a song is too high or too low, or if you're transposing it from male to female, whatever it is, you can transpose or shift the scale that a song is using. And maybe that's a little bit outside the scope of this video, but the idea is you take the same chord progression, in this case 1, 5, 6, 4, and you map it to a different scale. You take the melody, right, Beauty and the Beast, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you map that to a different scale, and we call that transposing. So maybe a little bit outside the scope of this video, but I just want to show you how much you can do with these different ideas. Learning your scales, learning your different chords. This is what playing piano is. So the more time you spend playing around with this stuff, the better you're gonna get. So let's say you've got a low voice, like maybe you're a bass, and you just wanna rock Let It Go in the key of C. Let it go, can't hold it back anymore. No one's gonna come up and be like, actually that's in the key of A flat major or F minor. Like, no one cares. It sounds like the song. You're playing the right chords, just in a different scale. Your action step for this section is to play around with different chord progressions. So let's say we pick 1, 3, 6, 4, one of my favorites. First thing I've got to do is figure out what key I want to play in. And let's say we want to play in the key of A. So this ties back into the diatonic chords, right? So if I did my A chords, then I've got those ready to go and I can just pick a certain order. So like I said, I'm going to do 1, and then 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do the 3 chord. Then 3, 4, 5, 6 would be F sharp minor. And then 4, 6, 5, 4 would be D. So all together I have 1, 3, 6, and 4. So that could be a song right there, right? Starting on 1 to 3 to 6 to 4. So as you can see, each of the things that we've talked about really builds on the last, right? If you haven't done your scales, if you haven't done your diatonic chords, then doing chord progressions like that, that's going to be really tough. So make sure you've done the action steps, put in the time, and let's keep on going. Moving on now, I want to cover one more thing with chords and one more thing with scales. I outlined this whole video before I started, and I realized that I really wanted to get these last two things in here because I think they are essential concepts, and I hope you're still with me. If you need to pause the video and come back later, I totally get it. But let's talk about one more thing with the chords, which are called inversions. This is really easy, I promise you. All an inversion is changing the order of the notes within a chord. For example, I know a C chord is C, E, and G. Now what I could do is take C from the bottom and move it to the top. Okay, now I've got what we call a first inversion C chord. It's still C, E, G, but I just changed the order. Now I could invert it up again. I could move E to the top, and I have second inversion, which is G, C, and E. Then if I invert it one more time, I get back to root position, which has C on bottom. You don't have to stress about this a ton. Honestly, I really like root position chords where I just keep everything in order. But one place where doing inversions really can help, especially as a beginner, is it can make it easier to get from one chord to another. For example, let's say I want to go from C to F. Okay, this is kind of a big jump. So as I'm playing, maybe I have a melody up here. Jumping that left hand, it's not the hardest thing in the world, but maybe it could be easier. So I might notice, okay, both the C chord and the F chord both have the note C within them, okay? For the F chord, it's the top note. For the C chord, it's the starting note, the bottom note. So what if I do an inverted F chord? In other words, instead of F, A, C, I put it in a different order, like C, F, and A. So I just move these two up here. Now I get to keep C the same and switch between those two chords so much easier. Pretty cool, right? Now it just depends on what chords you're switching between. Sometimes there's an easy way to do the switch, and other times you just kind of have to jump to a different chord. More times than not, you can find a way to finesse your way into a different chord. I'll give you one more example. If I want to go from C major to A minor, you'll actually notice those chords have two notes in common. C and E for the C major, and C and E as well for the A minor. So what I can do, check this out. I'm just going to change C major to A minor, playing the same notes I was, A, C, and E, but just in a different order. So I took A, C, E from here, then I moved it down and did A, C, E there. Now my switch is super easy, it's just one note. So it's just something to be aware of that you can do this. For some beginners, it really stresses them out and they hate the idea of these inversions and it's confusing and they don't get switching the order. So if that's you, don't worry about it. Come back to this video later. Work with the root position chords first and then you can focus on switching up the order if you want to later on. Now, moving on from our inversions, let's cover the last chunk in our music theory section here, which is minor scales. And I'm including this because I get a lot of complaints that I don't talk enough about them in my videos. And the reason I don't is because to me, it's just so simple that it kind of naturally flows out of everything we've already done. So first thing to talk about though is what even is a major key or a minor key? Well, very simply, a major key has a more happy sound, and a minor key has a more sad, kind of depressed sound, maybe something like this. Right? That's a little bit darker. But the good news is, every major scale already has a minor scale built into it. So now you're probably thinking, dude, what? I'll show you. If you go to the 6th note of a major scale, and you just play 6 to 6, that is what's called the relative minor. For example, the C scale we talked about was all white keys, right? Now, if I go to the 6th note of that scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I get A. Now I'm gonna play from A to A, using again, all white keys, same as the C scale. Right, just to show you. That is the A minor scale. Super easy. Let me show you another example. Let's say I'm looking at the F scale. So I could play from F to F, or I could go to the relative minor, which starts again on the 6th note. So let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That puts me on D. So if I want to play, in this case, D minor, all I have to do now is play from D to D while keeping this same scale. Check it out. And there's D minor. So if you want a darker sound, if you like the minor key stuff, just remember, go to the 6th note of a major scale and you get your minor key scale. Now there's plenty more we could talk about with minor keys, but I don't want this to just become a music theory video. I've already got a lot of music theory stuff on my channel, so you can watch another video after this one to get more into it. But for now, let's give ourselves a break and let's go back to the music room for the last section.
We're definitely at the last section of the video here, so if you've made it to this point, you are a champion. Thank you so much for staying with me, and I hope you've loved it so far. Now, this last section is going to be miscellaneous things, right? We're going to talk about pianos, lesson books, gear, just a mishmash of things that I think we should cover before I wrap up this video. And let's start with the piano itself. Now, obviously the top tier is a real piano, an acoustic piano, whether that be a grand or an upright or whatever else you might have. That's definitely going to be the best option. You're going to have weight to the keys, you're going to have overtones and richness from the real strings and the body of the piano. But if you don't have a real piano, there are definitely some affordable options for keyboards. Now, a couple things you want to look for. I only have 2 criteria. You want to make sure the keyboard is full size, which means 88 keys, and you might be tempted to skimp on it at the beginning because it's cheaper to get less keys, but you're going to grow out of that so fast. So I recommend just bite the bullet a little bit and get the full-size keyboard, and you're going to thank yourself down the road. The other thing is you want weighted keys, and it could be semi-weighted, it could be fully weighted, but you want some kind of weight to it. And I've even seen like these full sort of like faux piano modules where the keys are just plastic and it feels terrible to play. And this happened to me, it can throw you off when you go play a real piano. So when I went to audition for Berklee, I had come from these plastic keys and then I went to a real piano and like none of my notes came out on the real thing. So it was such a train wreck. But I'm here to stop that happening to you, so make sure you get those weighted keys. And what I'll do is I'll actually put a few options for different keyboards in the description of this video, so you can check out different price points. And if you are in the market for a real piano, I would highly recommend Facebook Marketplace. Whenever people are moving or changing things up, switching houses, they're always trying to get rid of pianos because they're so heavy, and you typically have to pay movers to move them. So if you offer to cover the cost of movers, typically they'll give the piano to you for a huge discount. Right? If not free. But the downside is you have to make sure that the piano is tuned, and it can get out of tune when you move it. So you might have to hire a tuner when it gets to you, maybe take a musician friend along to make sure it's playable, the keys aren't sticking, there's nothing weird going on with it, and just scope it out before you decide to purchase. In terms of programs and lesson books, obviously I highly recommend my program, which I've talked about, but if you'd rather go with a lesson book, the best one I found is the Adult Piano Adventure series. It looks like this, and it's the most gradual, easy to follow along, clear, yet impactful lesson book I've ever seen. I love it. And I actually switched over as a teacher because I grew up with Alfred's, and I found that people just progress so much more smoothly with Piano Adventures. So that's my recommendation. You can check it out in the link below as well. And I'm actually a really big fan of using lesson books to learn piano. And I know it seems boring, I didn't love it when I was starting out, but it really does go through everything in the most methodical and gradual way possible. So you move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And if you just stay with it, you're really gonna be amazing by the time you reach the end of a book or a book series. And honestly, I think it's one of the best ways to get the most out of the time you spend practicing. Because if you just sort of go it alone and you try to teach yourself or you try to learn just songs you like, you're probably going to do things a certain way, you're going to develop certain roadblocks, you're going to be limited in certain capacities, whereas the lesson books are going to make sure you're well-rounded, you're exposed to a lot of different ideas, and you're going to be pretty much good to go. All right, I'm having my daughter Viv join me for this part of the video. It was just Halloween, so we have her little skeleton hoodie here. But yeah, so probably the most common question that beginners ask is, how long does it take to learn piano? And here's the thing, I really don't like that question, because imagine asking somebody, hey, how long does it take to make money? They'd be like, well, what do you mean? Like $1, like $1,000, 6 figures? What do you mean, right? It's the same way on piano. Do you mean play Mary Had a Little Lamb? Because you could do that today. Do you mean, play pop songs? Because then maybe a year. Do you mean play classical pieces? That could be 5 to 10 years. Or do you mean perfectly play the Winter Wind Etude or La Campanella with no mistakes? Because that could take, a lifetime to really perfect that at a concert pianist level. So it depends what you want to do. That's you. You tell them. It depends what you want to do. Yay! I would say as a general rule of thumb, about 1 to 3 years is where you're going to start to see progress and be reasonably comfortable. But I always say it for the entire first year, don't judge yourself at all. Check your ego at the door, be patient, and just give yourself a chance to grow and learn how to do it. Okay, you've survived, you've made it to the end of the video, and once again, I'm so proud of you for watching all the way through. So let this be the start of your new life playing piano, the start of a new journey, and get out there and actually go apply the action steps. Grab my course if you want to get a little more in depth, and just start playing. Look up some chords, rewatch this video, whatever it is that you're most excited by, just jump in and don't overthink it. I'm so excited for you to start this journey and develop a skill that will pay off for life. So have fun with it and piano on.